you for attending our first Korean Culture Integration event. This special evening is brought to you by the Greater Kokomo Chamber of Commerce, and I'm Courtney Butler, the Chamber Manager. Thank you for being here tonight. As you might have heard, Star Plus Energy, the joint venture of Stellantis and Samsung SDI, is building a $2.5 billion electric vehicle battery plant in Kokomo. This development will have a tremendous impact on our community. Part of that impact will be welcoming Korean residents and businesses. By familiarizing the community with these neighbors, we hope to create the most welcoming space possible here in Kokomo. We welcome the audience to submit questions for our speaker to address at the end of her presentation. If you didn't receive a postcard at registration, Alliance staff will be around to provide you with one. If you have a question, please pass your card to the end of your row and our Alliance staff will collect. So pass to this end to be able to collect those. For this evening's session, we are pleased to partner with Security Federal Savings Bank as our reception sponsor. I wanted to thank Security Federal for their support of this event. It is now my distinct honor to introduce our speaker for this evening. Sung Kyung Kim is an inaugural Korean Foundation Endowed Professor in the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures and the director of the Institute for Korean Studies at Indiana University, Bloomington. She previously served as the chair of the Department of Women's Studies and director of the Center for East Asian Studies at the University of Maryland. She has also served as the founding director of the Asian American Studies program. Kim's work as a cultural anthropologist includes in part the processes of transnational migration. In addition to numerous articles and book chapters, Kim has authored 2 books and is working on a 3rd manuscript now. Please join me in welcoming Sung Kyung Kim.
Good evening. It is really heartwarming to be here tonight. When I was invited by Lori Dukes, that I was wondering how many people will be here, who would be interested in. And she told us when we first got here that we will have very packed auditorium, and which is true. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. And whatever I will be sharing with you, and whatever question you may have later on, please feel free to ask away, and I will try to answer as best as I can from the knowledge that I have had from Korea and in the US. And we will have a good conversation tonight. So let me just throw something here. You heard Courtney introducing me. And even before that, I forgot to thank, of course, Lori Dukes, and also the Greater Kokomo Economic Development Alliance for inviting me, and also Chancellor of IU Kokomo, Mark Canada, for having the dinner for us, and other staff members at the Alliance. And I was also pleasantly surprised how many business names were out there. And Lori did tell me there are almost 600 members in your Chamber of Commerce here. So, what can I say? I was thinking of Kokomo as tiny place, and I have to say I was quite pleasantly surprised. So one thing, even before I start, you heard my name, Seung-kyung Kim. One of the things that you may have to learn how to pronounce Korean names, which is everywhere, anywhere. If you look at the spellings, you will never be able to guess what kind of name that is, okay? And Korean names has two syllables most of the time. There are some names only with one syllable, but usually there are two syllables. So please do not chop off those two syllables into one name, one syllable, okay? I was telling many of my friends that jokingly, if I say your name is Mary Beth, it's together. If I just say Mary, would you answer it? So please pay attention to those names and be respectful for each other. And I came to this country in 1980 after I finished my BA in Korea. When I came, I thought I was able to speak English pretty well. And guess what? I landed in LA airport and I was asking people which gate should I go to change my plane to go to New York, and people didn't understand. And that really just killed my spirit in a way that coming from Korea in 1980 was not that many people, that many women at that, coming to the US to study. So from then, it's now 42 years in the US. So lived in the US a lot longer than I lived in Korea. So in that way that I was living my life biculturally and interculturally. So for that kind of experiences, I can share with you what are some of the characteristics of Korean culture and Korean corporate culture, which is I learned from, again, for preparing for this talk, I learned from reading other things too. So let me ask this question first. How many of you own an automobile made by Hyundai or Kia? Not that many. Okay. How many of you own Samsung smartphone, TV, refrigerator, all kinds of things, electronic goods? My goodness. So Samsung obviously is doing a lot better than Hyundai. Okay. Mm. So the title, as you can see, I put it here as Intercultural Understanding and Communication, South Korean Corporate Culture in 21st Century. This graph shows the annual GMP per capita from 1953 to 2021. In 1953, immediately after the Korean War, the annual GMP per capita was just US $67, whereas in 2021, it was $35,110. In the same year, the US annual GMP per capita was 70,249. So the graph looks, very sharp, as you can see. And because of its success, South Korea is described as the miracle on the Han River and is often considered to be a model for successful economic development. However, when you look at this photo, this is how South Korea looked in the 1950s. The war-torn South Korea. In 21st century, these are, when you just Google South Korea image, then these are standard images of South Korea today. And as you just saw, the contrast is very stark. And these photos are only 70 years apart. Okay. So in the 1950s, South Korea depended on foreign aid, mostly from the United States, for reconstruction, as well as food, fuel, clothing, and medical supplies. And it also required military support from the United States. Its recovery was widely regarded as impossible. Douglas MacArthur, the UN general who led the UN forces in the Korean War, famously was quoted as saying, quote, "This country has no future. This country will not be restored even after 100 years," end quote. So within 100 years, as you saw, there was a very, very rapid development. Yet in 1996, only 40 years later, South Korea joined the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, a group of the most advanced economies in the world. And in 2010, it joined the OECD Development Assistance Committee, and South Korea's entry into OECD Development Assistance Committee marked the first time that a former aid recipient entered the ranks of the OECD Development Assistance Committee and became a donor. And as of 2021, South Korea is the 16th largest donor among the 31 OECD Development Assistance Committee member countries. So I am going to share about 7-minute video that was created by the Korea Foundation sponsored, it's a part of Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The title is Secrets Behind Korea's Economic Success, and you will see visually what I have just talked about. Can I just do this?
In 1945, Korea gained independence from 35 years of Japan's occupational rule. But the Korean War broke out on June 25, 1950, even before they could enjoy their newfound freedom. Taking a toll of some 5 million casualties, the Korean War left the newly formed republic in a state of devastation. However, during the busy efforts of restoration, education became the nation's highest priority. Although they were struggling from day to day, Korean parents did not give up on the education of their children. Despite the war's devastation, the government invested in education, making primary and middle school attendance compulsory. This dedication to and investment in education produced a highly trained workforce that would later on become the impetus for Korea's economic turnaround. Unable to recover from the ruins of war on its own, Korea was forced to rely on foreign aid. But when the foreign aid subsided, after completion of the major restoration work, this caused Korea's economic growth to stall. This was a dire situation for a nation whose budget relied more than 90% on foreign aid. It was at this time that the military regime came to power. Having succeeded in a military intervention, its leadership made economic development their top priority, if only to quell widespread public turmoil. In order to spur economic growth, the military regime founded the Economic Planning Board, giving it unprecedented powers for planning, allocating the budget, and for attracting foreign capital. The Economic Planning Board developed a 5-year plan. This was to be the new blueprint for economic development. In 1962, the first 5-year plan was put into action. The problem was the acquisition of funds. Unfortunately, the United States reacted with indifference. Berger, the United States ambassador to Korea at the time, also made a negative report on this plan to Washington, D.C. But Korea did not give up. After endless efforts, they were able to receive an inflow of capital from West Germany. The miners and nurses that were dispatched to West Germany sent their earnings home, and the government was able to obtain loans by pledging these funds as collateral.
저희들 분푼이 보내는 것을 종합적으로 해가지고 참 그걸 갖다가 경제 발전 어느 곳에 쓰고도록 하는 걸. 그때 정책 입안 정책을 하시던 분들이 참 뭔가 잘했다고 생각합니다.
This was helpful, but far from enough. Due to an inability to attract sufficient funds, the Korean economy took a nosedive. Fortunately, the light industry sectors like textiles, wigs, and needlework developed rapidly and created momentum for the Korean economy's growth. While guiding the economy with policies such as rationalization of the exchange rate and interest rates in 1964 and 1965, the government also responded to the market's demands and fostered free enterprise. However, since the light industries relied on low-cost wages, their competitiveness weakened when wages increased. The government began to invest in new industries, such as steel, coal, chemicals, machinery, and shipbuilding to create a powerful engine for economic growth. Steel was the first heavy industry to be developed. Despite skepticism and concern about the feasibility of such a venture, the government launched a massive effort to build an integrated steel mill in 1970. The United States and other nations looked upon this project with doubt, as the steel industry requires massive investment and cutting-edge technology. A more advanced nation than Korea at that time had attempted this task, but failed. In spite of such skepticism, the Pohang Steel Mill began to produce steel in 1973.
산업화를 해야 되니까 국가의 경제 구조를 산업화의 구조로 가져가려고 했으니까 제조업이 중심이 돼서 계획이 만들어졌지. 그래서 산업의 쌀이라고 하지 않나? 철이. 그리고 초량공업이 물론 들어갔고.
Although it entered the steel industry about 60 years later than advanced nations, Korea would soon become the world's 6th largest producer of steel. The success of this primary industry paved the way for the advancement of other steel-related industries, such as shipbuilding, automobiles, fine machinery, construction, and electronics.
So you got some of the visuals that I have started to talk about here. As I said, the Korean economic growth is called the miracle on the Han River. Right? And there are three particularly important factors that are considered to be key in this successful and fast economic growth. First, government leadership. Second, government corporate collaboration. And third, educated citizens. The period when South Korea's economic development really took off is during the Park Chung-hee regime from 1961 to 1979, when he was assassinated by his own KCIA person. Park's government prioritized economic growth above everything else. It chose key industries, set economic targets and goals, imposed performance standards on corporations, and provided state support to corporations through tax breaks, subsidies, and preferential loans. And Park government issued several 5-year plans directed toward the goal of export-led industrialization. And his planning committee set very specific and targeted plans for economic growth. So if you meet the target, then you were rewarded. If you didn't, you were reprimanded, and you were not getting more government subsidies and what have you. So the government's goal of economic growth included all aspects of social and political life, including not only business, politics and security, education, and even down to family planning and population control. South Korea is known in the world as a country where family planning has been the most successful one in the world. When in 1950s and 60s, most women had 6 children. In the 80s, it went down to 4 to 3, 90s 2. Now Korea, unfortunately, is facing the lowest fertility rate in the world. So it has been the kind of a pendulum that many children, too many children were born, and the government was trying to cut down on their population growth. And now the government is putting tons and tons of money into the funds, policies for women to have children. But again, we cannot go into those issues. Those are much more complicated issues that if I were to come back here again, I can talk about family planning and why Korean women are not having children anymore here. Okay. So here, you can see that the corporations were key players, as I said. And you can see some of the corporate, the CEOs who later became multinational corporations head. And here you can see Samsung's Lee Byung-chul, founder of Samsung. Jung Ju-young is the founder of Hyundai. And Woo In-hee, I believe, is LG related. I don't know whether he was the founder or not. But these are the earlier corporate CEOs that who worked with the government and trying to have the economy going. And also in 1961, the government established the Economic Reconstruction Committee to bring together the leaders of major corporations, while the government planned, set budgets, and collected and distributed funds. The corporations constructed industrial facilities, including steel mills and fertilizer factories. And this strong alliance between the government and specific corporations, and we are talking about designated corporations here, was very important. And here are some quotes of scholars highlighting the critical role of corporations in economic development. And I bolded right here, spectacular vision and decision making to lead their companies, and talking about these CEOs. As you watched briefly from that documentary, South Korea's industrialization began with light and simple manufacturing, where cheap labor was South Korea's only comparative advantage at the time. And many of these industries employed a labor force of young women who were the lowest paid workers available at the time. However, by the 1960s, most young women had had primary education and were literate, so they were the ideal workforce at the time. By the 1970s, South Korea moved into more advanced heavy industries such as steel and iron, fertilizers, ships, automobiles, chemicals, and electronics. As I mentioned earlier, an educated workforce was critical for the success of the government's economic development plans. From its beginning in 1948, South Korea's people have been passionate about education, so much so that South Korea is now called as examination hell, meaning the passion for education is became too much in some ways. So South Korean rate of high school students going to college at this point is about 90%, which is amazing when you think about the rate in the US, which is about 50%. So the kind of passion for education, it does bring about the kind of mind that set for development oriented and work hard and what have you. But at the same time, we also know there are negative consequences from having too much competition, too much exam oriented, too much everything in a way. And you can see 1945, it was only 22% literacy. And in 1990 on, it was over 90% literacy. And today, South Korea is the 10th largest economy in the world. It is the fourth largest in Asia behind China, Japan, and India. And if you consider, I don't know how many of you looked at the map, but South Korea is the country about the same size as Indiana. And it has about 50 million, 50 million people living in that country. So population density is also really high. The key industries are in consumer and computer electronics, automobiles, and South Korea is currently the world's largest producer of semiconductors. Large corporations like Samsung continue to dominate in South Korea's economy in both the domestic and the international market. Bilateral and multilateral initiatives and collaborations such as the Samsung SDI Stellantis collaboration are especially important. Now let's talk a little bit about South Korean corporate culture here. And knowing this may help you to move forward as more people are coming here and you will be interacting with more Koreans in Kokomo. So if we were to look at South Korean corporate culture, 4 aspects, I would think these are key aspects. First, diligence and hard work. Second, collective focus. Third, hierarchy. And fourth, communication. So here, under diligence and hard work, South Korea's economic rise is attributed to workers' commitment and hard work. And you may hear many times when Korean workers come here, they will say "빨리 빨리." It's Korean word. Hurry, hurry. Everything is in a hurry. In a way, we have to do this within a certain time frame. And no matter what, we need to do this. And under that, another catchphrase is "we can do it." 하면 된다. It's another Korean catchphrase coming from 1960s. Everything is possible. But what that means, everything is possible, that does require a lot of workers, commitment, and also sometimes sacrifice too. Employees do have, although it's changing, do have strong commitment to the company they belong. And also, they are expected to work long hours. So I just finished co-editing a journal, and the title of that issue is Time Divide, Gender Divide. It is about South Korea's overwork phenomena and how that is divided by gender. And anybody who's interested in, let me know. I will give you the citation. The other part is collective focus. You will again hear many encounters in the coming years. People using we. They do not use I, my, much at all. And so much so that we will say my children, my family. Koreans would say our family, our children. And so that collective focus is de-emphasizing individualism and individual kind of ways of thinking, rather to think about the group and the collective. That comes first. The other part is hierarchy. Again, hierarchy does exist everywhere, any work setting, in the West, in the East, and everywhere else. In South Korean corporate culture, the respect to elders and your superiors is, I'm putting caveat here because it is changing. It is changing, but the emphasis was in the past a lot more on you do respect your superiors and you do respect your elders. One part that hierarchy being in the place, what it does is once the goal is set, everybody is aligned, from the person who gives the setting the goal and to the last person who will be following that objectives and orders. It is aligned in such a way the pace of things gets done is a lot faster than a structure that is more horizontally structured. So that is another, if we were to say, a positive aspect of hierarchical structure in corporate culture in Korea. And I believe communication probably is the most intricate, complex and complicated issue among people who are coming from different culture. The first thing I said here, and there's a Korean word called nunchi. Nunchi is something that subordinates should be able to understand what your superiors are wanting you to do, okay? Without telling this subordinate directly do this X, Y, and Z, the subordinates should know even before being told what to do. And this kind of, this culture actually, not just in corporate culture, but in South Korea, it's also in military culture too. The subordinates understand superiors' wish before and be able to deliver, be able to proceed with the things that's expected. And disagreements should be expressed preferably on one-on-one context rather than in a group setting to make a person lose his or her face. But as I said, all these things I'm talking about, South Korea is changing rapidly. And as millennials and Gen Zs go into the workforce, their presence itself is causing changes in the corporate culture too. They pay much more attention to work-life balance. They're much less willing to work long hours. They're much less willing to go out for drinking and having dinner together and what have you after work in corporate. And on top of that, after the pandemic, as we know here too, many people worked either remotely or telework, what we call. Now, it's not just happening in Korea, but in the US too. In a university setting, in Indiana University, in Bloomington too, many workers would rather work remotely, not coming to work in person. So this issue, I believe, is not just we're facing, but it should be dealt with in many different settings too. And companies are also, they are trying to work, making the company structure less hierarchical and more horizontal kind of ways of communication too. So this part, I put it down here. You will be surprised, and especially women, when Koreans ask you, how old are you? In the US, you would not ask, especially women, how old are you? That simply or that directly. Not just how old are you, where did you go to school? If you are at a certain age, people would ask, are you married? And if you're not, they will ask, why not? And then, do you have children? And you said, no, we do not have children yet. And they will ask, like, why not? You should hurry. So all these kinds of direct kind of asking, it's not like, not that they're trying to intrude on your private lives. It's a one way of setting up relationship. So please do not take it as anything. Why the heck are you asking me this kind of questions? And they wouldn't mind at all if you ask exactly the same question back to them. They will be happy to answer you. So what it says is Koreans are quite direct in a way, showing their pleasure, their displeasure, their anger, their whatever. So some of the things you may have to adjust, and some of the things that you will learn and to, work together, to be in the same space, to be in same workspace or business space. So I put down here just a brief history of Samsung here, just so that you have an idea. Started in 1938. In the 1960s, Samsung Group entered the electronics industry. And then going on, in the 90s, Samsung became a world leader in production of computer chips and so to become the world's largest manufacturer of consumer electronics. And in 2022, Lee Jae-yong became the CEO and president of Samsung Electronics. So here, as I said, the corporate culture is changing. In this photo, Lee Jae-yong, the CEO, is telling young employees, please do not call me Mr. Chairman, 회장님. Please either use my English name, which is J, and we have another J sitting right here. And either that or just simply use my initials, JY, or again, call me Jae-yong Nim. Nim is the suffix that Koreans these days use, trying to address each other horizontally, more equitably. So I found this one not that long ago because, again, to be able to show Samsung SDI is one of the 10 best South Korean corporations with the organizational culture reputation. So you will be having a very good corporation coming into Kokomo with a good corporate culture. And Samsung SDI's CEO, Yoon Ho Choi, became CEO in March 2022. And he emphasized three policy: technology, quality, and profitability. But at the same time, he also emphasized communication as the key for his company employees trying to communicate either directly or whatever ways to let each other know. And I tried to find out about what are some of the ways that Samsung SDI has been doing. I found a lot of blogs, YouTube, by government sponsored or individuals just putting up their own vlogs, and through this again letting the communication happen. So I was going to show some of this, but I don't have time. So what I did was I found a similar kind of Samsung's incorporated in SDI in Hungary. And one of its employees, name was So Hojin, did a vlog and he put that up. And I wanted to show just 5 stills here to show. This one is aerial photo of Hungary Incorporated, the plant. And I called it as campus because it's huge, it seems like. At 7:30, he starts working. And the campus is so large, they run shuttle bus on the campus. I don't know how big Kokomo one will be, whether you will have shuttle bus or not, but this was huge. And this is their cafeteria. It looked quite nice, serving both Korean food and other food too. And this is the office layout, pretty open space. And I am guessing probably it'll be the same as here too. And it's 10:25 p.m. That's when he was going home. And he was saying, I cannot say it has been easy, but his family, his wife and children love living in Hungary, except him, because he has to work all the time. But he was happy to see how the lines were set up, and he was hoping. He has been in Hungary for about 2.5 years now, and he was hoping in, let's say, 3 or 4 or 5 years, that whole Hungary operation will be taken over by non-Koreans, or the Hungarians and others, so that they don't have to stay there anymore and completely turning it over to the Hungarian operation. And I am thinking probably the people who are sitting right here are thinking the same way, trying to set this up in 5-6 years. Again, the Kokomo citizens and Indiana citizens and U.S. citizens and whoever eligible to be able to work in this plant. Thank you, and I will stop here. And if you have any questions, and I will try to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we do have a few questions from the audience. I'm going to go ahead and read for you. The first question we have is, what do you think will be the most difficult part of the American culture or American corporate culture for Koreans to get used to? And what can we do to help?
So, American corporate culture. I'm not an expert. However, if I were to, here I'm doing a kind of kind of a, not quite a guess, but from what I know about the kind of work culture that I just shared here, long work hours, I would think the part that people would like to start at 9 o'clock, finish at 6 o'clock with 1 hour lunch time. That kind of work culture, Korean people will be a little bit unaccustomed to. The other part, again, as I shared, personal things, personal component of any employee's life. People are not. I don't think people who are working in a American corporate would like to be sharing much of it. And that's another part, again, people just have to get used to, and also by communication, talking to each other and letting each other know this is something we don't do here, and this is something we expect you to do. So that's where I would think that communication is the key at this point.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question is, does South Korea have a lot of joint ventures and ownership in the chips for vehicles in Taiwan?
That I do not know. Is the part maybe people who are sitting here may know. Do we have any joint ventures in Taiwan? We don't. Okay. So we have many different countries with the joint ventures, but yeah, Taiwan is not.
Thank you so much. This question is from Frank Faulkner, and the subject is famous Korean women, diligence and hard work. Have you ever heard of the famous professional pool player named Janet Lee, also known as the Black Widow? Korean, I think is what she, does she reflect a typical Korean drive for exceptional achievement through much practice and hard work?
I'm really sorry, but I don't know. The person who wrote that question maybe enlighten us. Who was it? My
Absolutely.
goodness, who would have known?
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. Yes.
Really quick, is there any other questions before I finish this last one? Okay, Alan. Can I have staff go and collect that for me, please? Another question is an economic policy of the Bill Clinton administration on NAFTA. She'd like explanation on that. I'm not sure.
Oh boy, NAFTA. I am not an expert on NAFTA, but because I lived in the U.S. during Clinton administration, the whole agreement is with, then again, if I'm wrong, please correct me here, with Canada and Mexico having a free trade agreement. That's as far as I understood. Anybody else who can enlighten us? And if the person who wrote that, if you had any connection or relation to this Samsung and Stellantis part that has anything to do with, because NAFTA, as far as I know, does not have anything to do with what is going on now.
Thank you so much. Another question, other than education, what other priorities do Koreans have for family activities? And so popular activities for children specifically.
But besides education, if you ask children, they would say, of course, I want to do X, Y, and Z, meaning go out to the field, go out to play, go out to camping, go out to do things. If they are not put into what we call as a have one kind of a meal, in a way that after you finish your school, then you go to an extracurricular activities mostly for academic stuff. In the US, when we do extracurricular, our kids do sports, mostly sports and other, probably if they are interested in musical instruments or dancing or what have you. At this point, South Korea is still going through a period of students are expected to just study. Okay. Most of and I mentioned earlier that So Ho-jin, who is in Hungary, said his family, his wife and his children are so happy. It's because they're not in Korea. In ways that the children get to have their own freedom in a way that they are not put into a squeezed space. Everything is going to the best college in the country. So that part, again, don't get me wrong here. That passion has made it possible for Korea to become as what it is now. But along the way, that a lot of kind of a byproduct, in a way, that how students are forced or pressured, what have you. Well, I'm talking a lot about this because this semester, my husband, Dr. John Finch, and I co-teach a course on South Korean education. So we are way into this education part now. The children these days, as I said, that everybody wants to go to one of the best colleges in the country. Some part that's changing is you must have heard about K-pop, BTS, right? even people who are here heard of BTS, right? Yes. So that part, culture industry, is becoming more accepted by Koreans, and children who are, if they have any talent, parents are these days willing to encourage children to go into a field where they are good at, meaning K-pop is one thing, acting is another. Well, let's think about here in the US, sports is one thing, right? It's the same goes. So the changing part is people are, even though it is very much, this part is very rigid, there are some changes that is happening in Korean society. And I expect that it will come to a certain kind of meeting point so that children also will be happy to pursue their own ambition, their own interests. I have seen so many students coming to the US when they come here just for a couple of years following their parents. They don't want to go back to Korea. And it's because what they're saying is we get to go to field trip so many times. We get to do this, we get to do that. And I don't have to go to Hagwon, the cram school, all the time. So those are the kind of aspects the people are, and like everybody else, we are all committed to our children's education. So it's something that has become a little bit more in Korea, and that's something, some part of the US, again, I know that we have to, it'll be good if we follow Korean education system. But if we can have the best of the both worlds, that'll be really nice.
Really quickly, last question for this evening. How can the church community welcome our Korean brothers and sisters?
Well, don't you worry, because many, many Koreans who will be coming would be already churchgoers. Okay, so you will not have to proselytize the many of them. They will be happy to join the church groups, and so much so that South Korea was called a Christian country. So it was in the past, church acted as a social setting where Korean immigrants, when they did not have any contacts, were able to have those contacts made and got help. And if you can help them to, welcome them, and they will need many of nitty-gritty kind of everyday things that they will need help with. And those will be the ones that they will appreciate. Well, I was really worried that I may cough because when I talk a lot, I cough, but I just did it after I finished, so it's okay.
This concludes our time for this evening. Thank you again to our sponsor, Security Federal Savings Bank, for their generosity in tonight's reception. Also, a big thank you to our speaker, Sung Kaeyoung Kim. Hope I got it right. Please join me in another round of applause. And lastly, thank you for your attendance here this evening. It shows you care about this community, and I'm truly appreciative of that. At the Chamber and the entire Alliance, we are dedicated to helping our community learn about the cultures and our incoming neighbors. By broadening our understanding, we can create new paths to prosperity in our community. Again, thank you for your attendance this evening and be on the lookout for future programming. Have a great evening. Thank you.